A jazz battle judge challenged the audience to show real jazz playing. Miles Davis stood up. It was October 2005 at the Blue Room in Harlem, and Miles had come to watch his grandnephew compete in a young musician's jazz battle. Sitting anonymously in the back, just another face in the crowd, Miles watched as a bitter failed jazz critic turned judge brutally tore apart every young performer. After the fourth group finished, the judge took the microphone and said condescendingly, "You know what? None of you can really play jazz. You're all copying YouTube videos and playing sloppy bebop. You want to see real jazz playing, real technique, real improvisation." He scanned the audience with contempt. "Anyone here think they can play better than these kids?" Miles, in the back row, quietly raised his hand. What happened in the next 5 minutes became the most legendary moment in Harlem jazz battle history. It was a Friday night in October 2005, and Miles Davis was doing something he rarely did, attending a local jazz event as a spectator. His grandnephew, Aaron Davis's son Marcus, was competing in a young musician's jazz battle at the Blue Room, a small club in Harlem that had been nurturing jazz talent for decades. Marcus had asked Miles to come, but had also begged him to stay low-key. "Please don't make it about you, Uncle Miles. I want to do this on my own." So Miles had agreed to come, but stay anonymous. He wore a simple black sweater, dark sunglasses even though it was dim inside, and sat at a corner table in the back near the bar. Just another older black man watching young jazz musicians. The competition featured 7 groups of high school and college-age musicians, playing a mix of jazz standards and original compositions. The format was straightforward. Each group played 3 songs, and a panel of 3 judges scored them on technique, improvisation, and musical understanding. 2 of the judges were respected local jazz educators, fair and constructive in their critiques, but the third judge was making Miles increasingly uncomfortable with every comment. His name was Bernard "Bernie" Crawford, and he'd apparently been a jazz journalist and failed musician in New York during the 1970s and 80s. He'd written for a few small jazz magazines, hung around the scene, but never quite made it as a performer or gained recognition as a critic. Now he was a bitter 60-year-old judging teenagers at a local jazz battle, and he was being cruel about it. The first group, 4 kids playing bebop, finished their set with Charlie Parker's Ornithology. Bernie took the microphone immediately. "That was sloppy. Your alto player doesn't understand Bird's phrasing. Your rhythm section can't swing properly. This is amateur hour. You need to study the masters for about 5 more years before you're ready to even attempt bebop." The kids looked devastated. One of the other judges tried to offer constructive feedback, but Bernie had set a hostile tone. The second group performed Thelonious Monk's Round Midnight and an original composition. Bernie's critique: boring, derivative. You're copying musicians who copied better musicians. Not a single original idea in that whole set. Monk would roll over in his grave. The third group played modern jazz fusion. Bernie: too much electronics, not enough soul. Real jazz comes from the heart, not from effects pedals and synthesizers. This isn't jazz, it's jazz-flavored pop music. Miles was getting angrier with each critique. These were young musicians trying their best, performing in front of people, taking the artistic risks that jazz demanded. They deserved guidance and encouragement, not this bitter destruction of their confidence. The fourth group included Miles's grandnephew Marcus on piano. They were called Next Generation, and they were 5 kids playing with genuine passion and considerable skill for their age. They opened with Take 5, then performed an original composition Marcus had written, and closed with Miles's own So What. They were good, not perfect, but energetic, musically coherent, and clearly loving what they were doing. Marcus's piano solo on So What had a few rough edges, and the bass lines weren't quite as sophisticated as the original, but it was a solid, respectful interpretation by any reasonable standard. Bernie waited for them to finish, then took the microphone with that familiar, cruel smile. "You know what your problem is? You're playing Miles Davis. You're attempting one of the most sophisticated catalogs in jazz history, and you simply don't have the musical maturity for it. That piano solo was a mess. Missed changes everywhere, no understanding of modal harmony, weak touch that wouldn't cut through a real jazz ensemble." Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. The other band members stared at their instruments. "If you're going to cover the masters," Bernie continued, "you better be able to actually understand what they were doing. Otherwise, stick to easier material. Play some contemporary smooth jazz or something. Leave Miles Davis to the professionals, who can actually comprehend his innovations. Miles felt his hands clench into fists. His grandnephew looked crushed. The other young musicians looked like they wanted to disappear. Bernie stood up from the judges' table and addressed the entire venue of maybe 70 people. You know what? I'm going to be honest here. None of you can really play jazz. All these groups tonight, I see the same thing. You're copying YouTube videos, playing sloppy bebop, smooth jazz nonsense, or electronic garbage. No understanding of real jazz history, real improvisation, or real musical conversation. He walked to the center of the small stage, microphone in hand, enjoying his moment of authority. You want to see real jazz playing? Real technique? Real improvisation? The kind of sophisticated musical thinking that made Miles Davis a legend in the first place? He scanned the audience with a contemptuous, challenging expression. Anyone here think they can play better than these kids? Anyone think they actually understand what real jazz improvisation sounds like? Anyone want to come up here and show me what a proper version of So What should sound like? The audience was silent, uncomfortable with Bernie's hostility and arrogance. The young musicians looked humiliated. Miles, sitting in the back corner, felt something break inside him. He'd promised Marcus he'd stay anonymous, that he wouldn't make this about himself, but he couldn't watch this failed critic destroy kids who were doing something Bernie had never accomplished, actually performing, actually taking creative risks, actually contributing to the living tradition of jazz. Miles slowly raised his hand. Bernie spotted the movement in the back corner. You in the back, older gentleman with the sunglasses? He grinned like a predator who'd found new prey, clearly thinking this would provide more entertainment at someone else's expense. Perfect. Come on up here and show us what you've got. Let's see if you can back up that raised hand. Fair warning, I've been studying jazz for 40 years. I've interviewed the greats, analyzed their techniques, written about their innovations. I know real playing when I hear it. Miles stood up and started making his way through the crowd toward the stage. People moved aside to let him pass. As he got closer to the stage lights and removed his sunglasses, a few people in the audience started to recognize him. Whispers began spreading through the crowd like electricity. Bernie was still talking, enjoying his moment of superiority. Fair warning, whoever you are, I've been studying jazz for 40 years. I've written about Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans. I know what sophisticated jazz sounds like. So if you're going to waste everyone's time with more amateur... He stopped mid-sentence as Miles stepped into the stage light, and the whispers from the audience reached him. Oh my God, that's Miles Davis. The entire venue went dead silent. Bernie's face went from confident to confused to absolutely pale in about 3 seconds. You're Miles Davis. I am, Miles said quietly. Can I borrow a trumpet? The trumpet player from the group that had just performed, the one Bernie had just criticized, stood frozen, holding a student model Yamaha horn. Miles walked over to him. Can I use that for a minute? The kid nodded mutely and handed Miles the trumpet with shaking hands. Miles adjusted the horn and looked at Bernie, who was still standing with the microphone, looking like he wanted to vanish. You said you wanted to see real jazz playing, real technique, real improvisation. I thought I'd demonstrate. The audience was completely silent, everyone holding their breath. Bernie sat down heavily in his judge's chair, the microphone still in his trembling hand. Miles looked at the trumpet, a basic student instrument, probably worth $400 new, with a stock mouthpiece and standard setup. Not a great horn, but an instrument nonetheless. He started playing. He began with So What, the song Bernie had just criticized the kids for attempting. But Miles didn't just play it. He deconstructed it, rebuilt it, showed every harmonic possibility hidden within those famous 2 chords. He demonstrated what modal improvisation actually meant, how a master musician could create endless melodic variations within a seemingly simple structure. He showed what conversation meant in jazz, how a soloist could ask musical questions and answer them, how phrases could build and develop, how silence could be as important as sound. Then he moved through other pieces, fragments of Kind of Blue, Round Midnight, Walkin' and Round Midnight. But he wasn't just showing off, he was teaching. When he played Round Midnight, he deliberately included some of the harmonic uncertainties the kids had struggled with, then demonstrated how to navigate them. He showed what real jazz phrasing sounded like, what sophisticated rhythm meant, what musical storytelling could accomplish. He played on that student trumpet for maybe 5 minutes, creating sounds and ideas that most people had only heard on classic recordings. The point was unmistakable. Real jazz wasn't about expensive equipment or perfect technique. It was about musical thinking, creative risk-taking, and the courage to say something personal through improvisation. The audience was mesmerized. Some people were crying. Others were recording on their phones, though most were too transfixed to move. Bernie was slumped in his judge's chair, his face in his hands. Miles played a final, sustained note and let it fade to silence. The blue room erupted. People were on their feet, applauding, shouting. The young trumpet player, whose horn Miles had borrowed, was standing beside him, openly crying. Miles handed the trumpet back to the kid. "You're better than you think you are," he said directly to the young musician, making sure Bernie could hear every word. "You made some mistakes tonight, but you had the courage to get on stage and improvise in front of people. That takes real musical bravery. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't play jazz. You absolutely can. You just need time and experience. The mistakes are part of learning." He turned to face Bernie. "Can I have that microphone?" Bernie handed it over without a word, looking like he might be physically ill. Miles addressed the audience, but really he was talking to the young musicians. "I came here tonight to support my grandnephew. I wasn't planning to play, but I couldn't sit here and listen to someone tell these kids they can't play jazz, that they're not good enough, that they should quit and practice for 5 more years. He gestured toward the groups that had performed. "Every single one of these young musicians is doing something important. They're keeping jazz alive. They're taking risks with improvisation. They're learning by doing, not just by studying. That's exactly how jazz has always grown and evolved." Miles looked directly at Bernie. "If you're going to judge young jazz musicians, your job isn't to tear them down because they don't sound like recordings from 50 years ago. Your job is to help them find their own voice, to encourage their creativity, to give them guidance they can actually use. Being cruel to kids because you're frustrated about your own career doesn't help jazz. It kills it." The audience applauded again. Bernie looked like he wanted to disappear. Miles handed the microphone to one of the other judges and started to leave the stage, but his grandnephew Marcus called out, "Uncle Miles, wait." Marcus ran onto the stage and hugged his great-uncle. "Thank you. That guy was destroying everyone's confidence. We all felt terrible about our playing." "You played beautifully," Miles said. "Don't let anyone tell you different. Keep playing, keep improvising, keep taking risks. That's what jazz is supposed to be about. Creative courage, not perfect imitation." The venue owner, who'd been watching from behind the bar in complete shock, announced that they were taking a break, that the judges would deliberate, and that drinks were half price for the next 30 minutes. As people moved toward the bar, Miles was surrounded by the young musicians, all wanting to thank him, ask questions, get photos. Bernie tried to leave quietly, but the venue owner stopped him. Miles watched as Bernie was asked to step outside. He had apparently been uninvited from all future judging duties. Marcus's group didn't win the competition. A quartet of music students from Juilliard took first place with an extraordinary performance of original compositions. But Marcus told Miles afterward that he didn't care about the result. "You standing up for all of us was better than winning any competition. That guy was making everyone feel like they should quit music. Now we all want to keep playing and improving." The video someone recorded of Miles playing went viral within hours, but more importantly, it sparked conversations across the jazz community about how to nurture young musicians rather than discourage them. Bernie Crawford's name became synonymous with destructive criticism, a cautionary tale about what not to do when evaluating young artists. Miles was invited to judge several young musician competitions after that night, and he accepted a few. His judging style was completely different from Bernie's. He found something to praise in every performance, gave specific actionable advice for improvement, and always emphasized creativity and growth over technical perfection. "The goal isn't to sound like me, or Bird, or Train," Miles would tell young musicians. "The goal is to find your own voice, to keep taking creative risks, and to remember that jazz is about conversation, not competition. If you're doing those things, you're succeeding. Everything else is just details." When Miles Davis died in September 1991, Marcus, by then a professional pianist, often told the story of that night at the Blue Room. In interviews and masterclasses, he would say, "In 2005, my great-uncle Miles wasn't supposed to play at my jazz battle. He'd promised to stay in the background. But when a bitter judge started destroying young musicians' confidence, Miles couldn't stay silent. He got on stage, played on a student trumpet, and showed everyone what real jazz mastery looks like, not just in technique, but in character. He taught me that defending young musicians is more important than staying anonymous. That's the lesson I carry with me. Rest in peace, Uncle Miles. Thank you for standing up for us." The Blue Room still hosts young musician competitions, and they've instituted what they call the Miles Davis Rule. All judges must provide at least one specific compliment and one constructive suggestion for each performance. No purely negative criticism is allowed. If this story of standing up for young artists and the true spirit of jazz moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that real mastery includes lifting others up, not tearing them down. Have you ever had someone defend you when you were being unfairly criticized? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to check out more stories about the moments when legends reminded us what true artistry and character look like.